My name is Martha. I am 62 years old, and I never thought the people I loved most would treat me like actual garbage to be thrown out on the street. It was a freezing Tuesday night when my own daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Greg, literally tossed my suitcases onto the wet porch of the house I had lived in for 30 years. I stood there, shivering in my thin cardigan, watching the heavy oak door slam in my face. The sound of that door locking echoed in my chest like a gunshot. I could hear Greg laughing inside, a cruel, muffled sound that made my stomach turn, while Sarah did not even bother to look out the window. They had taken everything from me: my home, my dignity, my savings, and my heart. I was completely alone in the dark, wondering how my own flesh and blood could become such a monster. But as I sat on that cold concrete, clutching my purse, I did not know that just 4 days later, we would be standing in front of a judge, and the gavel would come down in a way that would destroy their lives completely. Before I tell you exactly what the judge did to them, I want to take a quick pause. I am sharing this deeply personal pain because I know I am not the only one who has suffered at the hands of ungrateful family members. Please, tell me in the comments down below, from which city and state are you listening to my story right now? I love knowing where my voice is reaching, and it makes me feel a little less lonely in this big world. Now, let me take you back to the beginning so you can understand how I ended up freezing on my own front porch and how a mother's blind love almost cost me my life. It all started 3 years ago when my husband, Tom, passed away. Tom was the love of my life, a hard-working man who spent his entire life providing for us. We bought our beautiful 4-bedroom home in the suburbs when Sarah was just a little girl. We paid off the mortgage with sweat and tears, skipping vacations and dinners out just so we could own our little piece of the world. When Tom got sick, it was fast. Cancer does not care about your plans. After he died, the house felt too big, too quiet, and too full of ghosts. Everywhere I looked, I saw him. His favorite armchair, his reading glasses on the nightstand, the garden he loved to tend. I was drowning in grief, trying to figure out how to breathe without the man who had been my lungs for 40 years. That is when Sarah stepped in. Sarah is 35 years old now, and at the time she had just married Greg, who is 38. Greg always gave me a weird feeling in my gut. He was too smooth, too charming, but his eyes were cold. He worked in sales, but seemed to bounce from one failed business venture to another. But Sarah loved him, and as a mother, you want to see your child happy. You ignore the red flags. You tell yourself you are just being a protective mom. About 6 months after Tom died, Sarah and Greg came over for dinner. Sarah held my hand, looked me in the eyes with tears, and said she hated seeing me so lonely. She suggested they move in to help with the bills and keep the house maintained. I was so desperate for connection, so terrified of the silence in the evenings, that I said yes. I thought it was a blessing. I thought my daughter was wrapping her arms around me in my darkest hour. I cleared out the master bedroom for them, moving myself into the smaller guest room down the hall. I wanted them to be comfortable. I wanted to be a good mother. For the first few weeks, it was nice. We had family dinners, Greg mowed the lawn, and there was life in the house again. I felt foolish for ever doubting Greg. But the honeymoon phase did not last long. The mask began to slip, slowly at first, and then all at once, revealing the ugly truth underneath. It started with small things. I came home from grocery shopping one afternoon to find Tom's favorite leather recliner missing from the living room. I panicked, asking Greg where it was. He was sitting on the couch, playing a video game, and did not even look up at me. He casually told me he dragged it out to the curb and the trash guys took it. He said it was ruining the vibe of the room. I felt a hot tear roll down my cheek. That chair still smelled like Tom. I confronted Sarah about it when she got home from work, expecting her to be furious with him. Instead, she sighed and rolled her eyes, telling me Greg was right and that the house looked like a museum for a dead guy. A museum for a dead guy. Those words cut me to the bone. That was her father. But I swallowed my pride and my tears to keep the peace. I did not want to lose my daughter. But my silence only gave them permission to push harder. Soon, Greg stopped helping with the bills. He claimed he was starting a new consulting business and needed all his capital to get it off the ground. Sarah asked me to cover the electricity and the water, just for a few months. Then she asked me to cover the groceries. Before I knew it, I was paying for everything, just like before. Only now I was supporting 2 healthy adults who treated me like a live-in maid in my own home. The real nightmare began when Greg started talking about investments. He cornered me in the kitchen one morning while I was making coffee. He leaned against the counter with that slick smile and told me I had a lot of equity tied up in the house. He said it was foolish to let it sit there and suggested we take out a line of credit to flip properties and triple my retirement savings. I shook my head immediately. I told him Tom and I worked too hard to pay this house off, and I was not risking my home for a business venture. His smile vanished. His face turned hard and nasty. He called me a foolish old woman who did not understand how the world works, and he stormed out of the room. From that day on, the atmosphere in the house became toxic. Greg started treating me with open disgust. He would bump into me in the hallway and not apologize. He would turn the television volume all the way up when I was trying to sleep, and Sarah let him do it. She completely took his side. She started telling me that I was being selfish, that I did not believe in her husband, that I was holding them back. I felt like a prisoner. I started spending most of my day in my tiny bedroom just to avoid their constant hostility. I cried every single day, talking to Tom's picture, asking him what I should do. I felt so weak, so defeated, and so utterly alone in the house I helped build. Then came the document. About a month before the eviction, Sarah came into my room looking incredibly stressed. She told me that due to some new city ordinance, we needed to update the property tax records to show they were living there, just to avoid a massive fine. She handed me a stack of papers, pointing to a few lines at the bottom. She told me to just sign it for the city tax office and that Greg had taken care of the paperwork. I was exhausted. My eyesight is not what it used to be, and I trusted my daughter. I did not read the fine print. I signed the papers. I signed my own death warrant without even knowing it, believing I was just helping my family avoid a municipal fine. I did not know that what I had actually signed was a quitclaim deed, transferring the ownership of my beloved home entirely into Sarah and Greg's names. They had tricked me. My own daughter had looked me in the eyes, used my love and my exhaustion against me, and stole my house. I did not find out until weeks later. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when Greg walked in with a smug look on his face. He tossed a piece of paper onto the counter in front of me. I asked him what it was. He smiled and said it was a 30-day notice to vacate. He told me they were selling the house because he needed the capital for his business, and I needed to be out by the end of the month. I froze. The bread dropped from my hands. I told him he could not sell my house, that this was my home. He laughed, a loud, barking laugh, and said it was not my house anymore. He reminded me of the tax documents and mocked me for not reading what I signed. My heart stopped. I looked at Sarah, who had just walked into the kitchen. I begged her to tell me this was a joke. Sarah could not even look me in the eye. She stared at the floor and crossed her arms. She coldly told me it was for the best, that I needed to go into a retirement home anyway, and that they needed the money to build their future. She actually said I had lived my life, and now it was their turn to take what was mine. I felt the room spinning. I could not breathe. The betrayal was so deep, so profound, that it felt like a physical knife in my chest. I whispered through my tears that I would not leave, that I would call the police and fight them. Greg stepped close to me, towering over my small frame. He told me to do whatever I wanted, but the law was on their side. He said they owned the house, and if I did not leave quietly, he would throw me out himself. For the next few weeks, I lived in pure terror. I tried to find the original deed, I tried to call legal aid, but I was so overwhelmed and depressed that I could not think straight. I was paralyzed by the trauma of what my own child had done. Then came that terrible Tuesday night. They didn't even wait for the 30 days to expire. Greg had invited some of his loud, obnoxious friends over for a party. I asked them to turn the music down because I had a terrible migraine. Greg snapped. He grabbed me by my arm, gripping it so hard it left bruises, and dragged me down the hallway. He yelled that he was sick of me complaining in his house. Sarah went into my room, grabbed my 2 suitcases, and started throwing my clothes into them. She screamed at me to just go, saying I was ruining everything. They dragged me to the front door, threw my bags onto the porch, and pushed me out into the freezing rain, locking the door behind me. I sat on that porch for 2 hours, sobbing until I could not breathe. I had no car, it was pouring rain, and I had exactly $42 in my purse. I finally gathered the strength to pick up my bags and walk 3 miles in the rain to a cheap rundown motel near the highway. I paid for 1 night. The room smelled like stale smoke and mold. I sat on the edge of the stained mattress, soaking wet, shivering, and completely broken. I had failed as a mother. I had failed to protect the home Tom built. I wanted to just lay down and never wake up again. The pain of knowing my daughter discarded me like actual garbage was too heavy to carry. I felt my spirit completely shatter that night. But as the sun came up the next morning, casting a gray light through the dirty motel window, something inside me shifted. The crushing sadness slowly hardened into something else. Anger. A deep, burning, protective anger. I remembered Tom's face. I remembered how hard he worked for our family. I remembered how much he hated people who took advantage of others. I realized that if I gave up, I was letting them spit on Tom's memory. I picked up my phone. I had one person I could call, Arthur. Arthur is 65 years old, a retired lawyer, and Tom's oldest and most trusted friend. He was the man who had helped Tom with all his legal affairs and his will years ago before the cancer took him. I called Arthur, and through heavy sobs, I explained everything. I told him about the trick with the papers, the sudden eviction, the bruises on my arm, and the dirty motel room. Arthur was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. He told me to stay exactly where I was and that he was coming to get me right that second. 30 minutes later, Arthur pulled up to the motel. He helped me into his car, bought me a hot coffee, and took me straight to his home office. We sat down at his large oak desk, and he pulled out a thick, dusty file with Tom's name on it. He started reading through the documents, his eyes scanning the pages quickly. Suddenly, Arthur stopped reading. A massive, triumphant smile spread across his wrinkled face. He looked at me, took off his reading glasses, and laughed. It was not a cruel laugh like Greg's, but a laugh of pure, righteous justice. He looked me dead in the eye and said that my daughter and her idiot husband thought they were incredibly smart, but they were actually incredibly stupid. He said they did not know the kind of man Tom was. I looked at him, completely confused. I told him I signed the deed, that they legally had the house now. Arthur shook his head vigorously. He told me I was wrong. He said I did not even own the house to give it to them in the first place. He turned the thick legal document around so I could see it. He explained that when Tom got sick, he knew I was too trusting and had a soft heart. So before he died, Tom placed the house into an irrevocable living trust. He made me the lifetime beneficiary, meaning I had the absolute legal right to live there until the day I died. But I did not have the legal authority to transfer the deed to anyone. Only the trustee could do that. And then Arthur tapped his own chest. He was the trustee. He told me that the quitclaim deed I signed was entirely worthless. It was a fake piece of trash. But then his smile grew wider, and he told me it was about to get so much worse for Sarah and Greg. My heart started racing. A tiny spark of hope ignited in my chest. I asked him what else was in the file. He flipped to the next page and pointed to a specific paragraph. Tom had added an ironclad penalty clause to the trust. If anyone attempted to forcefully remove me from the property or committed fraud to claim the house, they were liable for severe financial penalties. Arthur explained that because Sarah and Greg filed a fraudulent deed with the county and then illegally evicted an elderly person with physical force, they had committed multiple felonies. He looked at me with fierce determination and said we were not just going to take the house back, we were going to take everything they had. For the next 3 days, Arthur worked like a madman. He filed an emergency injunction with the court. He contacted the police about the illegal eviction, the forged documents, and the physical elder abuse. He gathered all the evidence and built an impenetrable case. I stayed in his comfortable guest room, resting, eating hot meals, and gaining my strength back. The fear was completely gone. I was ready for war. On the 4th day, we walked into the county courthouse. My hands were shaking slightly, but Arthur held my arm, keeping me steady and focused. We walked into the courtroom, and I saw them. Sarah and Greg were sitting at the defendant's table, looking furious and extremely annoyed. Greg smirked at me as I walked past their table. He whispered that it was a nice try, but they had the deed, and I was wasting my time. I did not say a single word to him. I just kept my head high and sat down next to Arthur. The judge, a stern-looking man named Judge Harrison, took his seat at the bench. He looked over the thick file Arthur had submitted, and the entire courtroom felt dead silent. I watched the judge's face turn bright red as he read the details of what they had done to me. He looked up, glaring at Sarah and Greg with a level of absolute disgust I had never seen on a professional's face before. He addressed them directly, his voice echoing loudly and sharply in the room. The judge stated that he had presided over this court for 22 years, and he had rarely seen a case of elder abuse, manipulation, and blatant fraud as pathetic and arrogant as this one. Greg immediately stood up, puffing out his chest, and yelled an objection. He claimed they had a signed deed and that I gave them the house freely. The judge slammed his wooden gavel down so hard that the sound made me jump in my seat. He ordered Greg to sit down and shut his mouth before he held him in contempt of court. The judge held up the fake deed and declared it completely void. He explained the trust, crushing Greg's arrogant illusion of ownership in a matter of seconds in front of everyone. The judge did not hold back. He told them they could not steal what the victim did not legally have the power to give. He berated them for forging property records and for throwing a 62-year-old widow out into the freezing rain. He called them absolute disgraces to society. Sarah started crying loudly, but I knew those were fake tears. She begged the judge, claiming they did not know and thought they were helping me. The judge did not buy a single second of her pathetic performance. He told her to save her tears. He ruled in favor of the plaintiff, me, effective immediately. But he was not finished. He looked down at his papers, adjusting his glasses, preparing to deliver the final blow. The judge announced that because they illegally evicted me, caused intentional emotional distress, and violated the penalty clause of the trust, they owed the trust massive financial damages. He revealed that he had reviewed their financial records and saw they had just used funds from a joint account to buy a brand new luxury truck and lease an expensive commercial office space for Greg's fake business. Greg went completely pale. He looked like he was going to throw up right there in the courtroom. He begged the judge, saying that was his livelihood. The judge leaned forward coldly and said it was not his livelihood anymore. He ordered the immediate liquidation of all their assets to pay me. The judge garnished their accounts to pay the damages owed to me. Furthermore, he granted a full and immediate restraining order, barring them from coming within 500 feet of my property. Then the judge looked right at me, his face softening just a bit, and told me the sheriff's department would escort me home today. He turned his attention back to Sarah and Greg. He gave them exactly 1 hour to pack their personal belongings under strict police supervision before they were permanently evicted from the premises. The judge literally gave me their eviction notice, signed and stamped right there on the spot. He slammed the gavel down one last time and dismissed the court entirely. Greg collapsed into his chair, putting his head in his hands in total defeat. Sarah ran over to me, sobbing uncontrollably, grabbing my arm. She begged me, asking where they were going to go. She cried that they had no money, that Greg's business was ruined, and pleaded with me to let them stay in the guest room because she was my daughter. I looked at her, really looked at her. I did not see my little girl anymore. I saw a greedy, cruel woman who had thrown me out in the rain without a second thought. I gently but firmly pulled my arm out of her grip. I told her she should have thought about that before she threw my bags onto the wet porch. I told her she had no mother anymore. I turned around and walked out of the courtroom with Arthur. I felt 10 feet tall. An hour later, I pulled up to my house in a police cruiser. 2 armed deputies went inside and stood over Sarah and Greg as they frantically packed their bags. They were crying, arguing with each other, loudly blaming each other for the absolute mess they were in. I stood on the porch, the exact same spot where I had frozen and cried just 4 nights ago, and watched them carry their heavy bags out. Greg would not even look at me. Sarah looked back one last time, begging with her eyes, but I just stared back with a cold, blank expression. The deputies escorted them off the property and handed me my keys. I walked inside my house. It was quiet again, but this time it was not a lonely silence. It was a peaceful, beautiful silence. The air felt clean. The toxic energy was completely gone. The first thing I did was call a locksmith to change every single lock on the doors and windows. Then I went into the living room, sat down where Tom's chair used to be, and just breathed. I had my home back. My finances were secure, thanks to the damages the judge awarded me from their accounts. They were the ones out on the street now, forced to face the harsh reality of their own cruel actions. Justice is a beautiful thing when it finally arrives, and I knew Tom was looking down, smiling at me. Sometimes the absolute hardest lesson we have to learn in this life is that blood does not automatically mean family. True family protects you. They do not prey on your vulnerabilities, and they certainly do not throw you out into the cold. I had to break my own heart to save my life, but I realized that I am much stronger than I ever knew. I will never let anyone take advantage of my kindness again, not even my own flesh and blood. Now, I want to ask you, the person listening to this right now, if your own child did something this evil to you, would you have the courage to take them to court and kick them out, or would you have forgiven them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening to my journey. Until the next story.